All right, welcome back to the morning show here on the Raj News. Following President Buhari's comments to the 36 state governors on the economy being in bad shape, there has been several questions left unanswered by the Nigerian for the Nigerian people. How bad is the economy really? What does this mean for our institution and the layman? And how long would we stay here? And how do we come out of it? Joining us now to discuss all this analysis is Johhnson Chukwu, finance expert and Managing Director of Cowry Asset Management. It's good to have you here, sir, this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
And I would like to be able to, the first salvo from me is, was the president stating the obvious, or was this a projection? Because a lot of people have they've reading meanings to what the president said. Some were saying that he was just forecasting for the future and what to expect, telling Nigerians to brace themselves up, or the governors to brace themselves up for what will happen in 2019, while some people say he was just stating what we already knew, that the economy was bad.
Well, what I would say is that it depends on the context where the president was coming from.
What context do you think he was coming from?
Probably he's seeing, you know, as a president, he may have information that is not openly available to all of us.
Yes.
Take, for instance, the key things that the economy has started a gradual recovery, but a very slow recovery. If you look at the GDP figure in the second quarter of the year, it was 1.5%. Third quarter was 1.81%. And this president's statement contradicts what the vice president said at the vice presidential debate. The vice president said the government has succeeded in putting the economy on a growth trajectory. And the president is saying that, look, the economy is facing a very negative headwind. If you look at what are those things that could actually go wrong in the economy, one of which is a heightened political risk. That's why I said, unless the president knows what we don't know. If there is a crisis, a political crisis, as a result of the failure to conduct a free and fair election, the economy will go on a tailspin. But should we have a successful election, I believe the economy will be on a bend. The economy should witness a recovery. And that thing that could agitate the president's mind is that oil price has come down. That's why I said it depends on the context where he was coming from. Oil price has been trading about $80 per barrel. A couple of, for almost 9 months. Today, we're dealing with oil price about $60, $62 per barrel. Probably that is of great concern to the president.
But he's actually dealt with it when it was over $20, so...
Yeah, it was at some point in the last quarter of 2016, it was about $28. But that is not the first time oil price had done $28. So we shouldn't continue to use oil price as an excuse. And I wouldn't know where the context the president was coming from. But the president said that we should brace up, that we're going to be facing more difficult economic environment in 2019. Ordinarily, unless the president can give us the context where he's coming from. But there's also the challenge for the government that if they actually foresee a headwind, what measures has the government put in place to frustrate or forestall such headwind from occurring? I wouldn't know why a president would say, brace up for headwind. And then the next thing I should hear is that we have instructed the Minister of Finance, we've instructed the Minister of National Planning, we've asked the set up another committee to work on this, because this is where the headwind is coming from. This is where we expect the crisis coming from. I wouldn't know. The worst thing that would have happened in this year is that if we have a fair election. Should we have a successful election, I believe the economy should start recovering.
Indeed, without specifics, this is all confusing because, again, if you go to the latest report by the NBS, the Q3 GDP, it shows that the non-oil sector is driving growth with about 2.32%. So with oil prices falling, should there still be cause for alarm?
Yes. If oil price should fall below a certain level, it has an immediate, because of the pervasive effect of oil in the Nigerian economy. You remember that 90% of our foreign exchange earnings comes from oil. So the strength of our foreign reserve is largely dependent on the volume of oil we pump out and price of crude. So if oil price drops to a certain level, it will have a multiplier effect on the economy. But I do not even imagine that oil price would drop materially below the $60 per barrel benchmark that is trading today. So if you look at the factors that should drive the economy, what are those factors that are driving the economy today? Agriculture accounts about 29% of the GDP. Oil and gas sector accounts for about 9.3% of the GDP. Manufacturing sector about 9% of the GDP. Telecommunication about 13% of the GDP. Trade about 16% of the GDP. So these are the sector that actually propel economic growth in the country. So the key thing for the government is to decide, how do we stimulate each of these sectors of the economy? It's not the key thing about leadership is that as a president, at the level of the president,
yes,
his duty is to drive the improvement of the welfare and well-being of the citizens,
yes,
which include, apart from security, issue of economic access to economic resources, opportunities for people to express themselves, their God-given talents.
yes.
So they don't have opportunity of crying wolf.
Okay, so
they don't have the opportunity of sitting on their palms and sucking. The key thing for them is that once they have seen anything that they think is going wrong, they need to take measures to address it.
But in your opinion, what do you think the state of the economy is? Like you said, rightly said, the vice presidential debate, he said that the federal government has set up our economy for a good trajectory, right? What do you think the state of our economy is?
Well, if I must be honest with you, I would say that our economy is on a slow but painful recovery. And let me tell you what I mean by slow and painful recovery. Last year, 2017, the economy grew by 0.82%. In 2016, the economy contracted by 1.58%. Today, the CBN has predicted the economy grew by 1.75%. We've seen a growth of 1.9%, 1.5%, and 1.81%. But interestingly, our population is growing at close to 3%. So the implication of the population growing at 3% is that in terms of per capita GDP, it is shrinking. So if we share the resources, the goods and services being created in this country, across the population of the country, we're getting lesser and lesser share. So unless the economy is growing above the population growth rate, you're going to see the incidence of poverty keep increasing. And that's a challenge for the government. Well, irrespective of the government, I mean, I'm apolitical. The reality is that anybody who's governing this country has a primary duty to ensure our economy is growing above our population growth rate. Otherwise, our population will now be, instead of being a resource to us, an enabler will be a challenge for us.
All right, now looking at it from an economic standpoint, a lot of people have criticized, no, rather, politically, a lot of people have criticized the president and this particular administration for always still hinging on the fact that non-performance is simply based on the fact that they found the economy at a very bad shape. Economically, 3 years, 6 months, is it enough to begin to experience progress whereby you do not say that it was the past administration that left this country in shambles, that Nigeria cannot get to where it should be?
Well, let's start from what they call change leadership. Change leadership is brought into place when there is a failure of a previous leadership. So change leadership is coming to transform and not hold back to what happened in the past. And we have examples of African countries that are transformed from very poor situation. Rwanda witnessed the worst modern-day genocide. Today, Rwanda is a living example of a successful leadership. Look at Ivory Coast. A couple of years back, Ivory Coast was in tatters. Today, Ivorian economy is one of the fastest growing economies. Look at Ethiopia. In 2006, Ethiopia was a basket case. Ethiopians were migrating to all parts of Africa to survive. There was horrible famine in Ethiopia. But today, Ethiopia is growing above 9–10%. Morocco is another living example. So the reality is that we need to get the government to focus on leadership, leading the country out of the morass. We cannot continue to keep looking back. The truth is you can't unwind the past. That's the reality. So when the government keeps looking back and saying, we are headed back because we made this, for me, it amuses me. I think all of us as young, I'm much older than you guys, but young people have a duty to challenge those who are leading this country to focus on the future, because your prospect is not in the past. Your prospect is in the future. You're not going to go back and reverse what your parents have done.
Does it worry you that the president is speaking a different language from his economic team? For instance, the Central Bank of Nigeria governor just barely 2 weeks ago predicted a positive growth for the economy for Q3 into the mid-year 2019. He anchored this on political spendings. The budget minister, the finance minister, have also said, you know, the economic and recovery growth plan of the government is fantastic. It's going to work wonders, just given time. But here comes the president saying, gloomy days ahead. Does it worry you that there's no sync between the president and his economic team?
Well, what I would say is that, like I said earlier, that I don't know the context where the president was coming from. The facts on the ground will show that the economy, bearing any hiccup in the political environment, the economy will continue to recover. But with the current policy environment, the economy will be recovering at a very slow rate. Unless if there is a major setback in form of oil price crisis to $20, $25 or less than $40, then we might have crisis. We may have a challenge with sustaining the current positive economic growth rate. The key thing is people always say that the economic issues are not the president's forte. Nobody has competence in every aspect of human life. That might not be his area of competence. So that the key thing is they must have some level of synchrony. The economic team must brief the president at regular intervals. So that because the president is the country's strongest salesperson, is a symbol of authority. The president is a role model. And whatever the president says will determine how people will respond. So the economic team need to brief the president at regular intervals so that the president is at par with what is happening within the economic environment.
I mean, this is a president who is going into elections in barely 3 months. And for him to say this, then there must be some projections he's seen. But at this rate, what should be the attitude of the common man who doesn't understand where the president is coming from and who seems confused with what is going on with the economic team, what the economic team says and what the president says? What should be the attitude, the economic attitude of the common person in Nigeria now?
What does it mean for the leader?
You know, that's why I said that the president's role is a very complex role. He is also the role model. Whenever he speaks, it becomes a policy statement. It gives direction to the citizens. And if he says, which is also one of the reasons why in leadership, a leader must be self-motivated. A leader must have the energy to drive. When you talk of self-motivation, you're dealing with people who will not whine because things have gone wrong, who in the face of crisis will stand up and give you hope. So even if there is a dampened political prospect, it is for the president or the leadership of the country to come to the people to say, look, we have the strength, we have the capacity to drive through this process and restore growth. You don't need to bother. Rest assured of our judgment that we're going to take you out of the morass. It is not for the government to say, look, we are in a very difficult situation. Let me give you an instance. If you have ever been in a plane with turbulence, and then you know what the pilots will always say, look, we're going through an area of mild turbulence, but not to worry. It's nothing to worry about. Just sit down, wear your seatbelt. We're going to go through that. Just imagine if we hear from the cockpit, ladies and gentlemen, this flight is out of control. I can't deal with this turbulence. I mean, before the plane would even crash, all of you would have died. So the key thing about leadership is that the leaders have to be the motivator of the people. I do not imagine there is actually a major headwind. I don't imagine that. You
don't see us going back into a recession. I mean, it's tepid growth right now, but do you fear that we might end up back in recession? I
have mentioned the thing that would tip us back to recession. One, if we have a political crisis, so the government must have the primary duty to make sure we have a free and fair election. That's key. Okay. Second factor is if oil price suddenly drops to $30, $35 per barrel, I do not imagine that any of the two scenarios could occur. But in the absence of these factors, there's a natural growth associated with an emerging economy. Whatever you do, land will fall, sun will come, agriculture will deny 1/3 of your economy. If agriculture is growing, 1/3 of your economy is pulling up. Okay. Telecommunication sector accounts for about 13%. People are making calls. Then you have your trade sector accounting for about 16%. So you have some sector that without any policy will naturally sustain positive economic growth.
What about this situation of the security situation issue in the country with the Boko Haram and the herdsmen crisis? How much of an impact does that have on the economy?
Well, I think that must be contributing to the slow growth of the agricultural sector. If, for instance, until late last year, the agricultural sector was doing more than 3%. We've seen the agricultural sector is growing about 1.91% now. Probably because you have crisis in the Northeast, which has been consistent for the past 4 or 5 years. That crisis has spread beyond what it used to be to the North Central and then the Northwest. We now have bandits in the Northwest, killing people in Zamfara State, attacking people in Sokoto State, areas we never heard of, armed banditry. And cattle rustlers. Then if you come to the North Central, you are dealing with the issue of herdsmen, settlers, crisis that have displaced a lot of farmers. So this have a direct impact on economic activity, particularly the agricultural sector. Like I said, agriculture account for about 1/3 of the GDP. So if agriculture sector is growing about 5%, you can imagine if even other sector is growing, you will still have a growth of close to 2%. And that's the reality. So we are seeing slow growth in the agriculture sector because of probably part of the displacement, despite whatever policy the government is trying to stimulate that sector. So certainly, if you have security crisis, it will have direct impact on your economic performance. We're even lucky it has not strayed to places like Lagos. Yes. Because if you have a security crisis in Lagos, your economy will go on the dip.
All right, so looking at it now, since you mentioned Lagos, of course, the banking sector is actually heavy. They have a heavy presence in Lagos State here. Most of their headquarters are actually here in Lagos. And they said that the banking sector has actually felt the biggest bite from this adverse economic effect that we're actually seeing in this country, with the likes of British giant HSBC and also the Swiss one UBS actually pulling out of Nigeria, Polaris Bank, Sky Bank turning itself and actually rebranding as Polaris Bank, and the latest development that is still a developing story as we speak, talking about the Diamond Bank, alleged merger with Access Bank as we speak. All this, they're saying that it's just an indication that things are not right in Nigeria's economy. True or false?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. There are a couple of things that a banking failure or banking consolidation is a norm in any environment. Even very fast-growing economies, they witness banking industry consolidation. Sometimes it's purely driven by economic objectives. But you also have to deal with the banking crisis that had principally driven by negative economic development. Take, for instance, if you have high inflation rate, if you have a crash or negative economic growth, you could have impact on the level of non-performing loan in the banking system. Should you have high incidence on non-performing loans, it could lead to a banking industry crisis. Part of the crisis we had in 2008 was driven by a sudden dislocation in the economic environment, crash in oil price that led a lot of banks to now be carrying so much of non-performing loans that affected their liquidity and obviously affected their solvency. So you have banking consolidation could be driven by negative economic activity situation or positive economic situation. The instance you have mentioned, issue of Sky Bank, Polaris Bank, was because Sky Bank never really came out fully from the banking industry crisis when they tried to gobble Afribank and invested so much financial resources to acquire Afribank, and you do not leverage to invest in equity, particularly equity that you are not holding for speculative purposes. What I mean is this. If you borrow money to buy long-term equity instrument, remember the equity instrument may not be paying you dividend as to enable you to service your debt. So interest will be accruing, while as maybe even your investment in that equity is not appreciating. It could actually be depreciating. So you do not borrow to invest in long-term equity instruments. And that was one of the reasons why Sky Bank had crisis. The case of Diamond Bank is a different case. Diamond Bank also have huge non-performing loans, which is weighing down the performance of the bank. And when you have huge non-performing loans, like I said, it leads you to lose your liquidity. Because remember, when you take deposits, you lend the deposits. If you can't recover the deposits, you will not be in a position to return if you can't recover the loans, you won't be in a position to pay back the depositors when they come. So Diamond Bank was obviously having some stress as a result of high level of non-performing loans. But the issues that subsequently happened for me was one of the easiest and one of the smoothest ways to resolve a possible banking crisis.
No, but a lot of people had said that they politicized it and said that maybe it's the CBN governor trying to take over the Diamond Bank, and maybe it's Pascal Dozier and his son also trying to probably reap dividends from it. Because I'm even looking at, right now, I'm looking at a news press release based on this morning by Diamond Bank itself. All right, statement regarding the scheme to merge with Access Bank. They just put it out this morning, and you get to see this, and also stuff we've been flying around social media since yesterday, and try to address this for us. Is it just because we hear that it's actually basically financial, because the capitalization of Diamond Bank right now, things have not been going well. They said profit after tax, it has actually been dropping since third quarter of 2017 from about 3.9 it was, that by 2018 they were posting profit after tax of about 1.3. And they're saying that when you see all those kind of margins, then that means the bank is actually really in deep trouble.
Okay, I had mentioned earlier that Diamond Bank's challenge is because it has high level of non-performing loans. If what is in the public space is true, and that it has a non-performing loan about 150 billion naira, if you assume that the bank was earning 15% average return on its non-performing loans, 15% of 150 billion is something in the neighborhood of 30 billion. So clearly, if he has sterilized 150 billion that they cannot recover, it's not making any income from, certainly it will have an impact on its profitability, and it should have an impact on its liquidity. If 15% of your liabilities are so that you can recall it at any time, certainly those who have, you find it difficult to meet all the obligations because you have to hold other assets in other forms. But that's, by the way, you know, Nigerians are always looking for, how do I put it?
Conspiracy. Are you saying it's a
conspiracy theory? Yeah, we always have this fantasy about conspiracies. That's a funny thing about Nigerians. A Nigerian is looking for who is doing what beyond what they can see from the surface, and what is behind the motive. The reality is that a bank had challenges. It took a wise decision to, instead of waiting for central bank intervention, to drive its consolidation. Initially, he said he was going to raise capital, but you know this is not the most auspicious time to raise fresh capital in the economy. You are facing an election period. You are dealing with a slow economic growth rate. Also, you are dealing with a financial institution that had not done so well in the immediate past. So it was a difficult thing to raise capital. But what have they done? They have been able to get a good deal, I mean, for the shareholders and directors. I would say that. Because the price of Diamond Bank had gone below, at some point it got to about $60 kobo.
60 kobo.
Yes, then it went back to 95 kobo. Then they got a deal with Access Bank for a purchase consideration of 313 kobo. So for the shareholders, it's a good deal for them. The areas we should worry about is what happens to jobs in the bank, what happens to the options available to the banking public, in terms of those who would have ordinarily wanted to continue to enjoy Diamond Bank services. So that, for me, is
what about investors?
The investors are the ones, the investors in the equity of Diamond Bank are the ones who have gained. Because if the bank had remained as a standalone entity, and they wanted to sell their shares today, they would have probably sold as at Friday at 95 kobo. As at that Friday, they were getting a value of 313 kobo. They get an immediate cash payment of 1 naira, and two new shares of Access Bank for every 7 shares of Diamond Bank held by them. So for them, it's a win-win. Then for the other investors like depositors, they are rest assured that there is no threat to their deposit. For those who are invested in Access Bank assets like Access Bank, Eurobond that will mature next year, they can go home and sleep soundly and say, look, I know that when this Eurobond matures in May
next year,
2019, I will be paid back. So it has relieved this central bank, the economic management team, the stress of having to deal with a possible crisis in the banking system.
Although 2 different scenarios, we have seen the second-tier banks, Sky Bank and now Diamond Bank, being taken over or, bought over. Should we be worried about the happenings in the banking space in Nigeria, especially with the second-tier banks?
Well, what I would say is that it will tell you that there's benefit of size. And that's also for the country we should leverage on it. We're a big country and then we should leverage the benefit of our size. Let me tell you what I mean by benefit of size. If you have a huge balance sheet, let's assume this had the level of non-performing loan that occurred in Diamond Bank or Sky Bank happened in a bank like First Bank or Zenith Bank. Because of the size of their balance sheet, they would have been able to withstand it. If you have a balance sheet of 1.5 trillion and you have 150 billion in non-performing loans, you have basically 7.5% of your total balance sheet non-performing. If you have a balance sheet of 500 billion and 150 million is not performing, you are dealing with more than 35% of your loans, your total balance sheet, and you certainly have a crisis. So key things is that the management of the second-tier banks must be very more circumspect in their loan management. One, they should set more stringent single obligor limit beyond the regulatory specified single obligor limit, given that they don't have the balance sheet to absorb any major shock in a large ticket loan. So they should ensure that they rather have multiplicity of small and medium-sized loans than to have big ticket loan that if it goes wrong, it could actually affect their liquidity, solvency issue ratings.
All right, there's this popular saying that all acquisitions are mergers, but not all mergers are acquisitions. So which is the case right now?
I think clearly, if you look at the terms of the merger or the so-called merger, it's clearly an acquisition. In the first place, there's a purchase consideration defined as partly cash and partly shares. So if they are paying you cash to collect what you have, it can be a merger.
Yeah. So where does this acquisition leave Diamond Bank? Apparently, leave Access Bank. Apparently, Diamond Bank had like a huge amount of customers, 18 million to be precise, I believe, and Access Bank has about 8 million customers. Where does this put Access Bank?
Well, I think Access Bank wanted to buy into the retail
retail banking space.
Retail banking space, of which Diamond Bank has been trying to drive for quite some time. But beyond that, when you talk of 18 this and that, the reality is that most of these customers will cut across these entities. The very good customers in Diamond Bank will have account with Access Bank. So they may be very active in Diamond Bank, not very active in Access Bank. Okay. But the reality is that what Access Bank is acquiring a retail platform to also drive its retail banking services, while it will continue to focus on its corporate and mid-tier customers. So he's basically trying to buy into the entire spectrum of the customer base of the industry.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this on the morning show today. It's a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Johhnson Chukwu.
The pleasure is mine.